What did I read in October?
I'm just sitting here.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel, Book Omens. I'm Mara Lee. Today I'm going to do my October reading wrap-up. I read a total of 8 books and 15 short stories. Of those novels that I read, 2 were nonfiction, 3 were middle grade, and 3 were young adult books. I also took part in the Disability Readathon, so I'll make sure to post that in the description below and up in the cards. So yeah, because I talked about those books at length in my last video, I won't include them here, but I'll just say that I had a really great time doing the Disability Readathon. I had a great reading month altogether, besides one book which I didn't like. Okay, I liked the book, not the ending. And, but yeah, I talk about those books in that other video, so be sure to check that out. So the books I read for the readathon were Radium Girls by Kate Moore, You're Never Weird on the Internet by Felicia Day, A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer, Accidents of Nature by Harriet McBride Johnson, Out of My Mind by Sharon M. Draper. That's the one I had trouble with on the ending. And then Chester and Gus by Cami McGovern. Chester and Gus was my favorite book of the month, and it is so worth reading and checking out. So make sure that if you're interested in middle grade books to do that. It involves a little boy who is on the autism spectrum and his service dog, and it's a fabulous book. I also had one book that I DNF'd or did not finish, and that was called His Hideous Heart. It is a short story collection with 13 stories that are all based on Edgar Allan Poe's works. And the reason I DNF'd it was because I was already taking part in reading short stories with a Halloween group on Instagram, and I just kind of got bogged down with short stories. So I read 3 stories in that book, and then I decided just not to finish it. I might pick it up again at a later time, but we'll just have to see. So one creepy book that I read this month was Took by Mary Downing Hahn. It is a ghost story and a middle grade book, and it was really cute. I really enjoyed it. The main character in this book is 13-year-old Daniel Anderson, and he refuses to believe the ghost stories that are being circulated in his new hometown. These stories involve someone called Old Auntie, who lives at the top of Brewster's Hill, along with her man-eating razorback hog, Bloody Bones. But then Daniel's little sister starts to become more and more withdrawn, and she talks to her doll, which is kind of creepy, and spends time sneaking into the woods behind their house. And then one night she actually disappears, and that's when Daniel starts to wonder what she took. Yeah, this was a pretty cute book. I gave it 4 stars. From an adult's perspective, I enjoyed, well, I mean, enjoyed is a relative term. I found it interesting watching the time that Mary Downing Hahn took to describe the parents' kind of descent into depression. You could really see that happening as the story went on. And this was the first Mary Downing Hahn book I had read in years, and I definitely plan to read more. She's got a good handle on the creepy middle grade thing. Then another book I read was 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lippincott. From what I understand, this book has been developed into a book after the movie. Usually I don't like books that exist only if they're written after a movie. Mainly I just don't find them to be very well written, but I actually really enjoyed this. I haven't seen the movie yet. But this was really well written, and it felt like an actual novel that, exists by itself without a movie being attached to it. So this is a book about 2 teenagers, Stella and Will, who have cystic fibrosis, and they basically fall into forbidden love. So Stella likes to be in control of things at all time, and Will is pretty much the opposite. He cannot wait until the day that he turns 18 so he can just kind of drop all of his treatments and actually go out and see the world instead of experiencing them through the lens of extended hospital stays. And one of the reasons that Stella likes to be in control of things is because she feels like she kind of has to be. She's on a lung transplant list and she cannot get sick. So Will is the very person that Stella needs to stay away from. If he so much as breathes on her, she could lose her spot on the transplant list. So there's this rule in the hospital that they need to stay 6 feet away from each other at all times to decrease the risk of contamination. But suddenly to Stella, that starts to feel like much more of a punishment than a safety protocol, and she starts to wonder, what if they try to steal back just a little bit of space? 12 inches. 5 feet apart. Now, I can't personally speak as to the accuracy of the cystic fibrosis representation. However, I do know what it's like to stay in a hospital for an extended period of time. My husband, as I've said before, has a traumatic brain injury, and he was in a car accident. And along with his brain injury, he had almost every major bone in his body broken, and he was in the hospital for 6 months. So my point is that you really get to know the medical personnel in the hospital when you're staying for an extended amount of time. And so I felt that part of the story really rang true. So yeah, ultimately I thought this was just a really sweet story about two teenagers who wanted just a little bit more out of life. And I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. And now I can watch the movie. Though I do have to pick my moment because it's pretty much guaranteed to make me cry, and I have to be in the right mood for that. Okay, moving on to the short stories I read. I read 13 Victorian short horror stories. They were for part of a Halloween readathon that I did on Instagram, and it was really fun. And yeah, it was really interesting to me to see what people liked and disliked in each story, because everybody's reading tastes were so different. So I'm going to talk about 2 of my favorite stories that I read, because we'd be here into next week if I talked about all of them, and ain't nobody got time for that. So all of the short stories we read were found in a Kindle book, and it was called The Big Book of the Masters of Horror, Weird and Supernatural Short Stories. So the very first story that we read was called The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. I would consider this almost more of a novella. It was quite long for a short story, and it was kind of a slow burn story. It took a little bit to get into it, and it involves 2 friends who are on a canoe trip down the Danube River, and they're camping along the way. What I really liked about this was the way that Blackwood personified the environment around them, especially a mass of willow trees that was on the island that they were staying on. So there's one scene where the unnamed main character stands outside of his tent in the middle of the night, and he sees some of the willow trees rise up and start to move about. It's some pretty good stuff. So after that, some of their things go missing or are broken, and they find that they're temporarily trapped on the island because there's a small hole in their canoe and they have to repair it. And in the end, I gave that particular story 5 stars. I really liked it. My very ultimate favorite story of the short stories that I read this month was called Sredni Vashtar. I have no idea if I am pronouncing that correctly, but that's how I'm gonna go ahead and say it. And it was by Saki. Saki is a pen name. His real name is actually Hector Hugh Monroe, and he often satirized Edwardian society. He had a witty and macabre sense of humor. So this story involves Conradin. He's a little 10-year-old boy, and he is forced to live with his horrible old cousin who he doesn't like, and she doesn't like him. But Conradin has a secret that he keeps in the back garden shed. And he may or may not have started a 1-person religion centered around a ferret god named Sredni Vashtar. It's really, really funny. I will try to link that story and also The Willows below if I can find them available for free online, because they're both very old stories. So that's all for now. I had a great reading month altogether. I will see you next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.